Hello and welcome to another edition of At the Desk, your home for politics, crime, and history. I'm your host, Sean Romeo, and tonight our panelists will discuss healthcare and infrastructure, the wild story surrounding the D.B. Cooper hijacking, a game of Find the Real Headline with our history panel, and lastly a segment for our own Brendan Cuck about this week's solar eclipse. Now come join us at the desk. Welcome back. Tonight, our politics panel will discuss two of the most important topics that have dominated the political discourse in recent years: healthcare and infrastructure. For all those details and tonight's discussion, I will turn it over to the always interesting Jackson Tortone. Jackson.
Thanks, Sean. The buildings that we Americans work and live in, along with the roads that we drive on, and even the very cities that we walk down the street in, are extremely important to voters when election season comes around. The issue of the construction and maintenance of infrastructure is a crucial public issue that is oftentimes overlooked by the media. The debate over how much money should be invested into public construction is and always has been a heated one, and this election season is no different. So Jordan and Yaya, we're going to talk about this very, I think, overlooked issue, honestly. I mean, it's something that affects every single American every single day. I mean, potholes in the road, public transportation not being good, all these types of things, like poor construction of buildings that can lead to injuries and deaths, like all these types of things that we just don't even think about on a daily basis. So Jordan, what do you think about infrastructure right now and how the Biden administration has handled it?
Yeah, and I like what you said about how infrastructure is a very big part of Americans' lives, but I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily realize that. And also, people don't necessarily fully understand what infrastructure entails. It's not just the roads, it's not just potholes, it's also, internet speed, it's flights, it's ports, it's buildings, kind of like you were just saying. But so I think it definitely is a very overlooked topic, and election year comes around and all those hot button issues come up, and infrastructure is always a part of it, but it's not the big part of it. And I think we're not focusing as much maybe on it as we should be. I mean, the old PA, oh, the potholes are so bad, you're going to blow a tire out driving on the roads. I think it's definitely an important thing that we are thinking more about as citizens, because it's really what directly affects us.
Right, and it's something that you don't think about unless it's not being done correctly.
Yeah.
We take for granted the fact that most of our bridges haven't collapsed. We take for granted the fact that most people can drink clean water. But when you get in a position where you don't have that anymore, that's when you start saying, what is the government doing about this? And actually, the Biden administration has planned to invest a lot of money in it. In March 31st, 2021, Biden unveiled his American Job Plan, and basically he was planning on investing around $2 trillion over the course of his term to things like building public housing, making sure the roads are good, bridge maintenance, high-speed data like you guys were mentioning. And so far, it seems to have been working. I mean, for Fern Hollow, right, the bridge that collapsed in Pittsburgh, as soon as the bridge collapsed, Biden funneled up to $25 million, and that was made available for the city of Pittsburgh to rebuild that bridge. And within 18 months, it was rebuilt and open to traffic. So that's been pretty quick. I think in terms of that's been a pretty good effort.
Yeah, so it's very nuanced because, in some facets, the Biden administration has done some good for infrastructure, but he's also he's obviously a Democrat, so he's put a very high emphasis on kind of like climate control and controlling climate change with his infrastructure policies. He wants to enforce electric cars. He wants to, reduce greenhouse gases and all these types of things. And a lot of Republicans feel that that's going to waste money, waste taxpayers' money, with people who don't want their money going to that. So what do you guys think about his environmental initiatives when it comes to infrastructure?
Well, and a couple things kind of going off of what Yaya had just said. People don't notice infrastructure until it becomes a problem. And I think that's a great way to phrase it. You aren't focusing on, the energy that you're getting or the roads that you're driving on until it's not up to the standards that you would like it to be. And another thing was by the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was signed into law November 15th, 2021. And a big part of that law was one of the tenets that it had written out was helping tackle the climate change crisis, large investments into clean energy, and transitioning away from those fossil fuels into more clean energy sources like solar and different types of power like that. But I think it's an important step to take. And I know that's been a really big debate recently is, do we stick with fossil fuels, what we know? Do we try to shift to those clean energy sources? But I think it really comes down to the fact that climate change is real. We're seeing it. We're seeing the impacts it has on the world. And we need to be doing something about it. And I think it's really important that we're investing that money into finding clean energy sources and trying to reduce those practices that aren't doing great for our environment.
Right. And I think it comes back to government spending, which I think personally is the root to all these debates. We're going to talk about healthcare in a minute too, but infrastructure, healthcare, student loan forgiveness, things like that all comes down to government spending, and we've seen how that's been such a problem in the last few years. But I definitely agree with Jordan. I'm a firm believer that when you put money into something, you get that money back. Another big thing with Biden's American Job Plan is that he was planning to put that money in to also create jobs. So when you're building roads and you're creating jobs like that, when you're retrofitting electric grids in cities that don't have high-speed internet data, you're creating jobs for that. So that's American taxpayer money that's going into it, but that's also at the same time creating jobs for people who may not have been at work at that point. But I definitely understand the idea of government spending, because when you have budget deficits and everything like that, that also puts Americans at risk economically. So I personally believe that this is a good plan. Putting money in makes money back.
Yeah.
But I definitely understand where the concern is, especially with maybe a reduction in manufacturing. If fossil fuels go away, where are those jobs going? Who the people who are working there, where are they going to go as well?
And I think that's a big concern is, a lot of things we see, unemployment, where are these jobs going? Fossil fuels create a lot of jobs. How are we going to keep those jobs? How are we going to keep American people employed? And that's kind of where, just because we're taking away from one area doesn't mean it's not being reallocated somewhere else. But that's also hard because whenever you're working in the fossil fuel industry for so long, trying to then switch to clean energy, it might not necessarily be the same skills, and it might take a little longer to follow over into that. But I also think that while that would be a difficult transition to make, it's one that's worth making because, our generation especially, we need to be pushing for more clean energy sources if we want to keep, this planet happy and healthy for our hopeful grandkids one day.
So the question is, if the short-term cost of cutting these fossil fuels and changing our energy sources will be helpful in the long term, it really comes down to whether or not Americans play a huge factor in climate change itself, because the Earth has changed temperature so many times over its history, and that's what a lot of Republicans argue is that, okay, we're here, we've been here for 200,000 years now, the Earth is changing, okay, what do we have to do with it? And so that's their argument. Whether it's right or wrong, we'll only know in the future, really. But that's what their argument is against Biden and against Democrats in general, making these climate change initiatives and investing so much money into it.
Yeah, but that's why we see Biden had to stuff so many climate change initiatives in the Inflation Reduction Act. When you think inflation reduction, you're not thinking climate change, right? But Biden managed to put a lot of these initiatives to bring more, to reduce emissions, to get more clean energy in our energy sector in that package, because there was so much bipartisan divide on it. Like you said, Republicans don't really see an issue with emitting fossil fuels, which I personally believe is very erroneous. We know that the Earth has been changing climate since even before humans were on it, but we know that ever since the Industrial Revolution, it's been changing at a pace that it shouldn't have. That would take us into a whole different conversation about climate change, and I think that's something we can save for a different episode. But just going back to how that ties into infrastructure, how are we going to be maintaining our roads, maintaining airports when sea levels are rising? You've seen so many reports of the East Coast is sinking. Chesapeake droughts, Chesapeake Bay is going underwater, basically. People are living in food deserts. So when we have natural disasters starting to hit us more frequently, then what is infrastructure going to matter? Because everything that we've built is either going to crumble away or be blown away by a tornado or be flooded by a hurricane. So putting that money in, making sure that we're building sustainable roads and durable bridges, and also at the same time trying to tackle this climate change issue, I think they go hand in hand.
It's all definitely interconnected, and I think, kind of how you were saying, Republicans are saying, oh, but the Earth has been changing, and this has been going on for millions of years. Why should we do something now? But, if you wait and see, by the time you realize, okay, maybe this is something that we're doing, it could be too late. And going off of what you were saying, putting money into these things now, even if it's a precautionary measure, it's better than, oh, let's just play the waiting game and hope it's not us, hope it's not a problem. And we've been seeing the research that this is a problem, and that it's hard because spending in the government, it's always more than probably we would ever like it to be, but it's also kind of that give and take of, well, then where do you pull cuts from? Because everything that you're kind of putting money into, there's always a reason behind it, there's always importance behind it, and that's what makes it difficult.
So going off that, investing money from the government into something important, I want to shift the conversation over into healthcare. So of course, we're under Biden's administration currently, and he is trying to bring back Obamacare as much as possible, providing as much government healthcare at the most affordable cost for Americans. And a lot of people feel that that only benefits the lower class Americans, and it hurts the upper class and middle class. So what do you guys think about Obamacare, its effectiveness, and what is the best approach to healthcare in America right now?
I was going to say, healthcare is such an interesting topic in our world today, because you're right, a lot of these programs are aimed towards lower income or the elderly individuals, but it's also, we don't want to be, medicine should be medicine. It should be about treating people. It should be about keeping people healthy. It's not an industry that you would like to see a for-profit sign on. So that's where it becomes difficult of, I can understand why certain people are like, why do I have to pay into a system that I'm not benefiting from? But also, at the end of the day, we're all Americans. We want to help each other out. And there's too many cases of lower income individuals going into these hospitals because their life is at stake, and they need these procedures, and they need these tests, and they need these treatments that they can then not afford, and then they have no money left. They're going into bankruptcy. They're getting lawsuits because they can't pay their medical bills, and then you see people drowning because they just wanted to live. And that's a problem, and that's why I think healthcare is such an important part of every administration deciding how should we go about this, because you don't want to see people suffering. And while it's political, it's also humanitarian. We want to keep our people safe.
Yeah, definitely a moral argument. And I would like to point out also that America, we have a dual system when it comes to healthcare. So a lot of countries have like single payer, where it's just the government providing healthcare, and it doesn't really give people, regardless of their class, it doesn't give them a choice. So I would like to ask, like, people who do believe that the U.S. shouldn't be, or the government should not be spending as much, would you rather just have? I feel like this is a good compromise, because, like Jordan was saying, you have people who really just cannot afford to pay for medical expenses out of pocket. So if you are fortunate enough to be able to do that, why would you want to take away from somebody who is not in the same position as you? Because as much as America loves saying that everybody can achieve the American dream, it's possible for you as long as you pull yourself by the bootstrap. For a lot of people, it's just not. That's just not the reality at all. So you need to have, or at least depending on what your view of the government's role should be, but my personal view is that you need to have safety nets for people who just are unable to reach that point by themselves. When you have that cushion, you have people who can go and achieve that dream. I mean, I went to the eye doctor my freshman year when I was at Altoona, and to buy like my contacts that I'm wearing right now and my glasses, it was like $600. I was like, what the heck? It's very expensive.
Healthcare can cost a lot of money.
Very expensive.
It's what it comes down to, though, is it moral to require someone else to pay for your things? Because healthcare obviously is, a lot of people believe it to be a right. A lot of people believe that everyone should have it, and I personally think that everyone should have it, ideally. But should we require Americans to pay for another American who maybe doesn't take care of themselves as better as the other one who is taking care of themselves? There's a lot of nuances here, and that's where I think Republicans come in and say, okay, let's privatize it and let the free market take over.
And that's where it gets difficult, because, it's frustrating maybe to have to pay into something that you're not directly benefiting from, but also then you see it becoming in a humanitarian crisis if we don't do that, because then a majority of the people, there's a lot of people on these health plans, Medicaid, Medicare, and so if we stop the funding for that, then we have a big percent of the population who don't have any health insurance coverage, who are going to die from very treatable, very preventable illnesses, because people that can afford it don't want to have to help out.
Right, and you can even flip the question, is it moral for people who have so much money to stand in the way of people who don't have the same resources that they do from getting that same access? Because the rich have a lot of power politically, not just monetarily or economically. They have a lot of power politically. So if they say, no, we don't like this, then it's very possible that the government will lean more towards them because they have a lot of economic power. So is it moral for people with more resources to essentially try and take away from people who have less resources? So I think if we're taking the moral argument, you come to a stalemate, and you have to just decide what are you prioritizing? Are you prioritizing those with more resources or those with less?
Yes, and so it's a mix of an economic and a moral issue, and it's been something that's been debated for decades now, with Obamacare, with Trump trying to repeal that and that repeal not going through because of McCain, and it's just it's a very nasty debate. It gets very emotional. It gets very very intense on the debate stage.
Yeah.
But I do not see that changing for this upcoming election at all.
And I've noticed the more and more we dig into these different topics every week, it's always situations of it's hard to say what you should do because there's always two sides, there's always two arguments, and they're usually very good arguments. So it's really it's difficult, and it's why we see policies changing and it being hard to really figure out what's the best course of action.
Of course. Our YouTube channel and leave a comment to express your thoughts. Back to you, Sean.
Thanks, Jackson. I'm sure that both of these issues will be key in the upcoming election. Next up, our crime panel will discuss the fascinating story surrounding the D.B. Cooper hijacking. We'll be right back. On November 24th, 1971, a man who came only to be known as D.B. Cooper hijacked a Boeing 727 bound to Seattle, Washington from Portland, Oregon. He demanded a ransom and requested parachutes upon arrival in Seattle. After the plane landed and he received his ransom, he released his hostages, then instructed the crew to fly to Mexico City. Not 30 minutes after takeoff, he jumped from the plane with a parachute and disappeared, never to be seen again. To give you all the details of what may have really happened that night and the many sprawling theories surrounding the crime, I will hand it off to our crime panel host, my good friend, Eva Hines. Take it away, Eva.
Thanks, Sean. Unique to other crimes we have talked about here on At the Desk, this one is perhaps the most interesting, as today it remains completely unsolved, with all hints and clues not leading to enough evidence to truly put any suspects behind bars. This is the story of D.B. Cooper, a plane hijacker in 1971 who had a Boeing 727 bomb in a suitcase, requesting $200,000 for parachutes, whiskey, and a trip to Mexico City. With the pilot informing Mr. Cooper that there was not enough fuel to get to Mexico City, Cooper parachuted out of the plane in freezing cold overcast weather in November of 1971, where him nor the evidence was ever seen again. Now, Savannah, would you like to give us a little more detail about that day?
Right, so when he boarded the plane, the alias that he actually used was Dan Cooper, but it was allegedly misheard, then becoming D.B. Cooper. When he boarded the plane, he gave a flight attendant a note that said he had a bomb and then showed her his briefcase with a bunch of wires and what looked like a bomb. He was also smoking cigarette butts at the time, which are now missing, which is really crucial to how this case isn't solved because they could use forensics to match up the DNA. Now, he did request 4 parachutes and jumped out of the plane where he was never seen again. Some of the money was allegedly found, but traces of algae show that it wasn't the money because it only blooms at a certain time, proving that the money they thought was his wasn't his.
Yeah, and I think what's so crazy about this case is that, there is no answer. And so many people just, want to know what happened. And so many detectives were on this case and really just never got an answer, which kind of leads into my point about how there were a lot of potential suspects that ended up not going anywhere. The main suspect I kind of want to touch on was Richard Floyd McCoy. And he kind of has an interesting story. And I kind of see it as, the copycat crime to DB Cooper. So he basically committed this crime 4 months after the DB Cooper incident. And a little backstory to him is he basically ended up dropping out of college and going into the military. And he was in the military like 3 different times. He even got like the Purple Heart, which is a very honorable thing to get in the military. And so he kind of knew his way around a lot of like, you know, high-tech stuff, you know, the stuff going on in the military. And basically he wanted to go back, but his wife wouldn't allow him. So they ended up having a kid, and then he took up skydiving as one of his like main hobbies, which, you know, we'll kind of see in a second. And so basically he was kind of saw the DB Cooper crime play out, and he told a friend that DB should have asked for at least $500,000 to make this like worth it. So he kind of also said he had thought of a full way out to hijack a plane. So he told his wife about this situation, and basically she kind of got on board, but she really didn't think he was going to go through with it. And so basically she writes him out this like whole letter to kind of give the flight attendant, and she drives him to the airport, and basically he gets on a plane and he kind of pulls the same stunt as DB Cooper, where he gives a note and he says he has a pistol, and basically he asks for $500,000. They land the plane, and then like DB Cooper, he asks for 4 parachutes and walks down the back steps of the plane and jumps off. So it was crazy, but basically with him, they end up finding him a few days later, arresting him. He goes to jail, and there were a lot of speculations that he was DB Cooper, but a lot of that evidence has kind of been ruled out, and a lot of stuff didn't line up. I truly just think it was kind of like a copycat situation, but that was someone who was a key suspect at the time.
Well, I think something that makes him such a prime suspect is his passion for parachuting. You know, DB Cooper specifically requested a speed under 200 knots and an elevation of 15,000, so he really had to know what he was doing to be able to pull this off, and not a lot of people know how to do that. It's very specific.
Yep.
So that goes into, so one of the most interesting things about this case is it hasn't been solved. So in July 8th, 2016, the FBI suspended this investigation, and they speculate that he wouldn't have survived his jump out of the airplane for a few reasons. 1 being the weather, 2 being the clothing he was wearing, and the lack of skydiving equipment. I've been skydiving, I have a parachute. If you don't know how to skydive and you have a singular parachute that you haven't tested out, chances are it's not going to go, you know, you have to deploy a parachute at a certain time. Chances are it's not going to go as you've planned. Also, the money that he requested, it was not known to be spent. So they looked back into, you know, the financial records and the type of money. Also, he landed in a wooded area. Now, how they know that is they recreated the jump by kind of putting a bunch of things together and throwing it out of an airplane and seeing where it landed. It landed in a wooded area, and they have not found, you know, anything there. Now, years later, some of the money was found by a man who was on a trip with his family. He's found some of the money, but that is all we have of DB Cooper now, which is interesting because this case is now suspended.
Right, and that money was actually proven to not be his because it was found in a river with a specific type of algae growing on it that only blooms in certain months, and it didn't line up with the time that DB Cooper jumped out of the plane, so it was proven that that money found wasn't his.
Yeah, and kind of like what I touched on earlier is throughout this entire case, you know, it's been many years, so many FBI agents, detectives, like took on this case and had so many suspects lined up. There were so many different people that they took the time to investigate and get to know. And it was such a big thing. Everyone wanted to be the one who found DB Cooper. Like, who's more famous than DB Cooper is the person who found him. So everyone was so invested in this. And I remember watching that, like, when people's suspects were kind of rolled out, it was like life-shattering. Like, their life was over. Like, they went into a spiral. They just couldn't handle it because everyone was just kind of like, what happened? Like, it's just like that mystery in the air. And everyone wanted it to be their person. They wanted to solve this.
Now, some of the things that I found was interesting was DB Cooper was known to be a nice, you know, calm man, which you wouldn't expect for a person carrying a bomb onto an airplane, wanting to hijack the airplane. But he said to the flight attendant, he whispered to her, "Miss, I have a bomb. Won't you sit by me?" In a very calm manner, so she complied. She sat next to him. She asked to see the bomb. He showed her. And even when they landed and he had the money, she said as a joke, kind of to diffuse the situation, "Can I have a tip?" And he handed her some of the money. And she said, "No, I was just kidding," because obviously she didn't want to be seen with the money. But I found that really interesting because you would think a man that's capable of doing this would be, you know, evil from the looks of it, but in reality, he was very nice, which relates to a lot of criminals that we've covered in the past, which seem very nice from the outside.
Sam, and I think another thing that's really interesting is how he was even able to board this plane using an alias. The document verification was so different back then than how it was today, and he wouldn't have been able to get away with this in times like today because he would have had to present authentication.
Yeah, well, because 9/11 hadn't happened yet, the airport security was not as strong. He booked this one-way plane ticket with cash. Which maybe now it would cause a little bit of, alarms going up in the head, but he booked it with cash. He went right on this plane, and he was able to carry, a bomb device onto a plane, which would not happen today.
No, the times were so different. And another thing I want to just kind of touch on is how smart he kind of was. I mean, he pulled this whole thing off and didn't get caught. For example, when he went on there, he asked for 4 parachutes because maybe the people would have rigged one and maybe they thought he was taking hostages. He thought meticulously through all of this. And again, this is the most unsolved mystery. He was just very smart. Whoever this person was, not I know, but he was just he knew what he was doing. He had to have had some sort of background or training or way about him that led him to be able to pull this crime off.
And what's interesting is if he's still alive today, if he is out there, he's very smart because no one's found him. Technology is great. There's pictures of him online of what he supposedly looked like, and he's nowhere to be found. Chances are maybe he's died, but again, they haven't found a body. And actually, when they were doing this investigation, they found Barbara Ann Derry, I'm pretty sure her last name is, who was a teenage girl that was murdered. Totally separate case, but they found her body randomly, and they can't find D.B. Cooper's body.
Yeah, and that's just what's so crazy to me. I was even talking to my dad a little bit about this on the phone, and it's just, I don't know, the times were obviously very different. We have way more technology and updated things now, but it's how did this come out and no one was I know this guy and he went missing. How did no one have any trace back to him, I guess. It's just it's so baffling to me. Maybe it was just kind of the times, but it's how did no one kind of see I recognize that guy or a guy who kind of matches that description. I've seen him before, because the flight attendants did see who this guy was. Some people did get to see him. So I'm just kind of how did they never, I don't know, maybe kind of figure it out from
and
that.
And the flight attendant was able to describe him very detailedly, 6'2", 170 pounds. They knew exactly what they were looking for with this man.
Also, I just want to touch upon, he tried to do this on an airplane. That's smart, but at the same time, there was a much easier way to do this. So I wish personally that we could speak to him and he was in prison and we could kind of hear what he was thinking, because we've seen things like this happen in the future and maybe he was the start of it all.
Yep, I completely agree. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. But before you all go, I think everyone watching is probably noticing the elephant in the room. There's 3 of us again. This time, Ryan is missing. Well, he was arrested by the FBI earlier today under suspicion of hijacking a Boeing 727 airplane on November 24th, 1971, using the alias Dan Cooper. Back to you, Sean.
Well, I'm sure unless Ryan became the first person to ever time travel, I doubt he's actually D.B. Cooper. Anyway, thanks, Eva. Until someone figures out who the real D.B. Cooper was, this story will continue to be one of the most fascinating crimes ever committed. Next up, our history panel will play a game of Find the Real Headline. Stay tuned. If you think the era of fake news began only a few years ago, you are sorely mistaken. Tonight, our history panel will show you that wild headlines existed all the way back to the dawn of modern journalism in the late 1800s, with something known as yellow journalism. Tonight, our history panel is playing a game they call Find the Real Headline. For all those details, I'll hand it off to our history panel host and yellow journalism expert, Drew Comer. Drew.
Thanks, Sean. Here at the desk, we do our due diligence when we research for our episodes. Sometimes, however, we run into articles that walk the line between fact and fiction. This is nothing new to American society, but today, we here at the desk are trying to find or put our intuition to the test. We will present 3 other headlines to our other panelists, 2 of them being false and 1 of them being true. And whoever comes out with the most correct guesses will win bragging rights and the adoration of all of our loving and doting fans. Alrighty, so we're going to be covering yellow journalism today, which is misinformation from the past. And so we have some old-timey headlines, but we also have some new-timey headlines as well. And first up is yours truly. Wha-bam! Former CFO of Coca-Cola says, I regret taking cocaine out of the recipe.
Valid.
Second one is, front page boy is front paged for the last time. And then, quack doctor says cigarettes are bad for health. The truth says otherwise.
Ooh.
So I'll leave that up to you guys.
I really like the former CFO one. That feels like something that would come out of the 1920s or 30s. I don't know what you guys are thinking.
I think the cigarettes one might be
I
like
think it's the
a
cigarettes,
shock
no.
value. Like, oh, cigarettes are bad? Let me read.
No.
I mean, that wasn't something that was known up until like
Exactly.
late
I was going to
1960s.
say, Big Tobacco, they had a heavy hand in making sure that their cigarettes were not getting a bad reputation. So I'm going to lean with that one.
I'm going Coke. Sorry. I don't think that
What does front page boy is front paged for the last time mean?
Front page. I don't know.
What is
The
a front
immediate-
page?
That could be a red herring, but it also
have
could
no
be the
clue.
wrong
It
one.
makes me
yeah.
want to read the story. I want to read that story.
I'm
I
gonna,
don't.
I'm
That's
gonna
the
vote
one I
for
don't wanna read.
cocaine.
I think
One vote for
cocaine-
cocaine from me
So-
here at the desk.
I'll
Okay.
give it to a second.
Mine is cigarettes.
Okay, so we have
Cigarettes
2
as well.
cigarettes and 2 cocaine. And so the answer is front page boy. Front page boy is front page for the last time.
Wow, so we're all wrong.
Yeah, so you were all
Are you
wrong.
serious?
And the funniest bit about this story is that this kid was on the front page of the news several times before. He had like been beaten up before, but eventually he had gotten sick and died, and so
That was
he had
the
been on
title?
yes, he had been on the front page for the last time.
Oh,
Yeah,
that is.
it was like the 1930s, guys.
Oh,
so,
that's
you know.
terrible.
Wow.
That's terrible.
All right, so
I'm not laughing. That's.
Rest in peace.
Oh my God. I'm sorry. Hold on.
let's move on. Up
So,
next,
It's my
Yeah.
turn. All right. So, Razamafu.
Razmafu.
Razumafu once again.
So, my headlines are Assistant Secretary Roosevelt convinced the explosion of the warship was not an accident. Soviet officials speculate that Gorbachev was secretly at the fall of the Berlin Wall. And scientists discovered new species of plant that can increase human lifespan. Which one are we leaning towards?
Well, all these are very,
Yeah, they all
very
sound
realistic.
really good.
Yeah.
Something tells me it is Gorbachev being at the fall of the Berlin Wall.
This is a heck of a
Oh,
step
mine-
down
mine
from
is-
the cocaine.
I feel like
And
I
cigarettes.
would pick to read the Assistant Secretary Roosevelt one. So
You
I
would
don't
pick
Picking to read or
Well, yeah,
it's
but that's
true?
kind of what I'm.
Right,
That's
which
what
one
I
you
think
think
is
is
true.
true?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I
okay.
feel inclined with Assistant Secretary Roosevelt as well.
Yeah,
I
okay.
think
There's
that
something
I'm just
about
really,
it.
There's something about it. Exactly. I can't really put a finger on it, but
Something tells me that scientists discover new species of plant that can increase. That has to be a headline at some point in time.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it
that
doesn't mean
headline
it,
at all.
but that's,
That's why.
the true headline doesn't mean true in real life. So that might be the dark horse there on that one. So
Well, I'm going to vote for scientists.
All right, so we have scientists, 2 votes for Assistant Secretary Roosevelt, and a vote for Gorbachev. And the answer was Assistant Secretary Roosevelt
All right.
convinced the
Okay.
explosion was not an accident. So this is during the time of the Spanish-American War, which I chose personally because that's like one of the heights of yellow journalism. When we talk about yellow journalism, a lot of people allude to the time of the Spanish-American War. So I thought that was interesting. I like the conspiracy theory feel of it. So yeah,
all right.
hopefully
pick.
scientists will discover a
pick.
plant that increases our
Very
human
serious
lifestyle.
pick. Very-
Right?
yeah.
The next one is not so serious.
Very historical. Okay, let's be
All righty. So Audrey, you are next.
Me next. Okay. So we have the Titanic of theaters, globe disaster, and then we have hippies find their peace in festival tragedy,
That's definitely something you made up.
and we have Madman Momar, now a druggy drag queen.
Oh, I'm gonna be.
Okay.
Ooh, I'm in between Muammar the drag queen and a global disaster.
I think it's the globe disaster, like the globe.
Oh,
the
globe!
theater.
I
The
can't
globe
see
That's why
the
it's-
lights.
yeah,
That's why it's the
down.
Titanic
Titanic
of theater.
yeah. Hippie, because, well, there was a fire at the Globe Theater, but that was like in the 1600s. That was like a long time ago. So
Yes, it was.
I don't know if they were publishing articles.
They might have been, but it definitely would not be in that language. I'm going to say hippies find their peace at Festival Tragedy.
You make a very good point, Jake. I hadn't even began to consider such a thing. I'm going to go with Madman Momar now with Druggy Drag Queen because I like the alliteration in Druggy Drag.
I'm also going to have to go druggy drag.
Yeah, Druggy Drag for me too.
Okay, so that's like
All
almost
right,
a
so
unanimous decision.
all of you drew, and it was Madman Momar. Now,
Dang!
Druggy Drag
There
Queen.
you go.
so he was
Wow.
a Libyan politician. He was in rule of Libya from 1969 to 2011 when he was assassinated, and it was kind of just like they flashed up the title a lot. He was very eccentric. He was known for he was like tied with terrorist groups and organizations, and it was definitely something to get people to tune into that newspaper.
A
New York
terrorist
Post.
druggy drag queen.
I would read that.
Wow.
I think that's a
All
beautiful
right.
And I think
story.
we all
What a
would.
man.
Up next is Jake. Jake Santora.
What do you have for us, Jake?
Well,
What do we have in store?
I have a parrot was a gas fiend. At last killed his owner by tearing off burner while she slept.
Oh.
Illinois man threatens to kill president after drafted into war.
Real.
And second annual Miss America recipient breaks toe after fall when receiving crown.
I can believe the second one. I feel like the
I feel
second
like
one,
second annual.
Parrots are mischievous, though, guys. I think we fail to consider how mischievous parrots can be.
That is very true.
you're going for the dark horse again, I think.
I do. But I mean, Illinois man threatens to kill president after drafted into war sounds something very Illinois to happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a Florida man kind of situation.
Sure,
there.
Right.
Yeah.
sure.
I'm also a little like skeeved off by how long the parrot was a gas fiend. That title.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Right.
To be
definitely.
I
printed
concur.
largely for
I mean,
newspaper.
it
That
could have been
could be
taken out of the New York
editorial.
Times.
That's like a editorial kind of.
But New York Times was infamous for not doing yellow journalism. They like spoke out against it.
Oh,
they
that's
were.
true.
They were the old gray lady
Were.
from New York during
I'm
that
going to
time
go
period.
with the second annual Miss America recipient breaks her toe.
I'm gonna go with Illinois man.
I'm going with Illinois man too.
I'm going with the parrot.
Guys, that parrot was a gas fiend. You're absolutely
Wow! Dark horse for the win!
So
That's
actually,
great.
this happened in 1899, and this parrot actually hated everyone except its owner. But it had a
Period.
tendency to turn on the gas stove, but it never whenever the owner was asleep. So one time when it was asleep, it got out, turned on the gas stove, and killed the
owner.
And
Wow.
then was also dying whenever they found the parrot, but the parrot was actually saved. and the
Wow.
parrot-
Wow. They're
So
like, we got
it's
to
a
get this
murderer.
parrot some help.
Basically. Yeah.
That could be
Wow.
a Disney movie.
That's
That could-
insane.
Isn't that crazy?
A Disney
Wonderful.
movie.
A parrot
Could
murderer.
be.
Yeah, Rio.
Yeah.
Rio rated R.
Up next,
All right.
got
Director's
Brando.
I have a fun 3 for all of us today. Liquid gold, new medicine heavy in gold, causes man to become stronger than ever. Dies a week later. The aliens have come. Man claims he sees a big flying pancake in Annapolis. Fondles horse, but not his wife. Maryland man seeks divorce.
Wow. Oh, that says a
Brandon,
lot.
That would say a lot about you if you made that up. So I'm really hoping
That,
that's the
I
truth.
hope that one also is
You know,
the,
it, would,
the,
it
the
actually
true
wouldn't
one.
surprise me if Brandon made that one up. So I think I'm gonna have to go with Big Flying Pancake.
I'm going with Fondle's horse for.
Yeah, Fondle's horse for
Fondling
500.
horse, I just gotta go there.
So you guys are a big fan of fondling horses, what you're saying?
No,
Okay, I was just
I'm
making
praying
sure.
I'm
that
hoping
that
that's
is real. That's not
exaggerated.
something
That's why
that
I'm on this side.
I had to clarify. Unfortunately, you're incorrect. All of you guys are correct. I did not make that headline up. I am
Fondling
not a
horses,
psychopath.
John.
But
Yeah.
this story,
Maybe
in
I
general,
think
that
about
is a pancake and an alien. Wow. The horse was
that.
actually named during the divorce as a witness.
Oh.
Wow.
And there was a quote from the newspaper where the wife, who was divorcing the man, said that he fondles and touches the horse more than he touches her.
Wow.
So she asked for a divorce. This happened in Toledo, Ohio in
Oh,
1911.
well, figures.
What a t-
Jeez, make
And
Ohio isn't real,
I
so
think it's a
that's
good
fine.
example
I
of like
wonder if
those
it's-
kind of headlines like weren't popular to be announced before yellow journalism, right? But the
Wow.
sensationalism and the interesting headlines and getting more readers, that was something that really came around during that time
That's
period.
definitely gonna get
And I
clicks.
think like if you go back 20 years, that story's not getting reported. A reporter's going to see that and think that guy's a nut job, which
Yeah.
probably was. But I think it's just a good example of what yellow journalism did to the sensationalism of journalism as a whole.
Yeah, completely.
Back to the top, and that's me. Wazow, I have a few more headlines for you guys. So, the first one is Saudi Arabia to chair UN Forum on Women's Rights and Gender Equality. Biden crumples to dust during State of Union address. And last one is tech CEO builds second submersible to find the Titanic again.
You know what? No, actually, let me not say that. But I'm gonna go with the tech CEO.
Tech CEO, that's your pick.
Yeah, that's believable to me.
Okay.
I followed OceanGate pretty intensely.
Me
so,
too.
But
Yeah.
I wonder if that's flashy enough to be considered.
I'm going fake for that one, just because I feel
For tech
I
CEO?
looked into a lot of that.
Oh,
And it was Saudi Arabia.
Look at that.
Wow.
We're getting spoiled today.
Yeah,
We didn't even get a
spoilers.
chance to guess.
Yeah, but you
That's
guys all
unbelievable.
guessed incorrectly. But the
Yeah, we
funny
can
part of
talk
this
about it.
story is that, yes, Saudi Arabia was chaired as the gender equality and women's rights chair for the United Nations. And a lot of Western nations were not really happy about that fact because of the fact that Saudi Arabia is not very well known for gender equality
No, it certainly
or
is
women's
not.
rights.
No.
It's not.
That's not very good, is it?
No.
I didn't
Well,
see that headline.
Women
That's
can
really
drive
bad.
down there, so I guess that qualifies,
That is
right?
no,
that's true.
They can
women
drive a
can
vehicle
drive.
now.
Nice.
Alrighty. So now we move on
ironic.
to
All
Yaya.
right, back to me. Let's go. So, leaked CCTV footage of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping playing poker in an underground casino. Couple that's supposed to say gets infected with flesh-eating bacteria after eating at Arby's. And former U.S. Representative George Santos, expelled from Congress, says he's running again.
Arby's.
No, it's definitely Santos running again. There's no way that he would not try to run again.
Yeah, but that might
definitely
be
Arby's.
like.
I'm gonna go Santos. First of all, I like Arby's. Sorry.
Oh,
That's disgusting.
Sorry.
I don't.
I like Arby's. It's good.
You could get
And also
flesh-eating
Santos, I can
virus
just
from
see
Arby's.
him want the attention again. So I'm
Yeah.
not putting it past him.
Yeah.
So what are you guys, all Santos?
I'm saying Santos.
I might say leaked, just so we can get some more things on the board here.
I'm sticking with
Alright.
Arby's. I've never
Well-
said that
Like
sentence
those
before in my life, but I'm sticking with Arby's.
Drew and Jake, you are correct. The funny thing about this headline was I actually wrote it as a fake one, and then something in my brain was
You
like,
were
let me go double check.
Right.
Wow.
And he's actually running again.
Insane.
Excellent.
So let's bring back shame. But
Bring
anyways,
back Shaman's.
What happened to Shane?
2024.
question. Yeah, whatever happened to
I
Shame?
check
Mr.
up that
Santos, what
every
happened
day.
to your shame?
Yep.
Unbelievable.
Love to know.
Alrighty, now moving on to Audrey's second set of
Yes.
headlines. Ba-bam!
All right, so we have Aliens Among Us, Area 51 breach, sacrificing children to the state of California, and we have Hillary's hellbent on destroying democracy.
Wow.
All of these pretty solid. Pretty
Yeah.
solid Fox or Breitbart-esque news titles. I feel like a
concur.
lot of these I definitely could see. Though granted, sacrificing children to the state of California, I personally think that one has a lot of, that one could hold water. I feel like that one could get a lot of clicks, you know what I mean?
I'm
Yeah.
going with Hillary's hellbent on destroying democracy. Just
That's definitely
the double
been a headline.
alliteration. Like it.
Yeah, I do like the writing there, but I think I'm going to go with Aliens Among Us because why not?
I'll throw in some Division 2 and go Aliens Among Us 2. I mean, I remember whenever Area 51 was like fake.
That was 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
That was another
We were
thing.
4
bored.
years ago.
I was obsessed with that.
Unbelievable.
We were bored.
That's a moment in history right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
It was sacrificing children to the state of California.
Oh.
So
I'm
basically,
on it
this
right
was
now.
a real post, a real thing that people took seriously. It was, it took a Californian bill completely out of proportion and was saying that, the article was saying that this bill would allow people to kill their infants 7 days after birth, when really it was just legal protection for mothers who lost their their child in child labor.
Wow.
Oh wow.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow, wow.
Wow. Context
Deep.
is
A little
key.
crazy there, right?
Wow.
That's
Key.
Another thing to
But I'm
bring
glad
back.
I'm glad you acknowledged my double alliteration there. So I'm really
You're welcome.
That was
happy for
good.
that.
Another
one.
thing to bring back is reading comprehension because that's a serious allegation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Seriously.
Alrighty.
Wow.
Moving on to Jake's second set of questions.
All right, rare six-legged gazelle spotted in Israel, alone. South Dakota man lives off the grid, determined to avoid governor election results. And prison escapee caught after stealing children's costumes on Halloween to disguise himself on Halloween.
Oh.
Man.
I'm not gonna say it's prison escapee because disguise is spelled wrong. Is it a D E
Oh,
S?
it is.
It is spelled wrong.
It's a disguise.
Well,
It sounds like it was
process of elimination. Rare six-legged gazelle for me, I think.
I'm going to
I
go
think
with
of-
South Dakota man because what else happens in South Dakota besides avoiding the government?
Yeah,
you
or
know
like,
what I
yeah,
mean?
living off the grid.
Yeah, I
Okay.
have to go with South Dakota.
Yeah, I might say South Dakota.
Rare
Unanimous
six-legged
vote on
gazelle.
South Dakota.
Dakota.
Guys, it is a six-legged gazelle.
Yes!
Oh,
Bam!
man.
No way.
On it again.
It's kind of freaky.
No way.
Love it.
Oh,
like
okay. I don't.
It's like a belt. Almost.
Basically, this just recently happened. A wilderness photographer was out in Israel, and they caught that site. I just think it's incredible. And I was like, "There's no way." Like,
There's
I was
no
like, I
way.
think they're gonna think this is
Not a
fake.
big fan. I don't think you
Yeah,
are either.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
I love that.
I would expect the legs to be where the other legs are.
Me too.
Right?
Maybe
Yeah.
that's just me.
I don't like in a weird
Growing out of the
spot.
back.
Yeah.
Not a
Crazy
big fan.
gazelle.
Design error.
Design error.
Sorry, go back to the
Crazy.
drawing
Freaky,
board.
freaky.
It's all in
gazelle.
God's image, so.
That's right. Alrighty, so now we are moving on to, I believe, Brando's last set.
My final set here. Got another good group here. Man in Idaho wears taxidermy bear head as mask. Says he barely cares about COVID-19.
But
That's good.
Gordon Ramsay sex
Clever.
dwarf found eaten by badger.
what does that
Trump ally claims Biden couldn't golf if the holes were as wide as volcanoes. Immediately apologizes for sensitive comment.
He wouldn't apologize.
Yeah, no,
Right.
that one. I feel like Gordon Ramsay sex dwarf found eaten by badger is the one that I want to be real because I want Brandon to explain that to me.
Yeah, I can't get behind that solely because I just am not comprehending what that means. So I'm gonna have to go with Man in Idaho with the taxidermy bear mask.
I might do that too because that feels like a lot of people's response to COVID was
Right.
something.
I'm going with Gordon Ramsay sex dwarf for the plot itself. I simply think that's insane, and I just want to find out if it could be real, even though it's probably not.
I have really good news for you. It is Gordon Ramsay's sex
No
dwarf
way!
eaten
No
by
way!
badger. This is a completely
No
true
way!
headline.
All right.
Where there was a adult film star who looked exactly like Gordon Ramsay, but he was a dwarf.
Okay.
And he was actually found eaten in a badger den.
I feel like that's
God rest his
insensitive.
soul. May he rest
Oh,
his
no.
soul.
Sex
But
dwarf?
yes.
That's very
no.
Yes,
insensitive. They
and it
could've
was
called
pulled
something
off
else.
shelves immediately. It was a tabloid out in LA that published it immediately, a really small one. They published it and then it was taken off shelves the next day because of how they worded it. However, those words and that string together are something that should probably never happen again in history.
I'm very mad at you for
wild.
actually bringing that to my attention. I'll have to scrub my eyes out.
All of these titles have been so wild, so crazy, and it's been very hard to keep track of the points, honestly. It's kind of just gone one in one ear and out the other. And so, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for tonight, folks. And if you think that you could have done better than us, leave a comment down under the video so that I can argue with internet strangers. Regardless, being aware of past and present misinformation allows us to stop it from happening in the future. Back to you, Sean.
Thanks, Drew. I doubt I could figure those out myself. Lastly tonight, our own Brandon Cuck has a short segment about this week's solar eclipse. We'll be back in a moment with more. Since the beginning of time, people have been fascinated with unusual happenings in the skies above, and this week's eclipse that moved through the U.S. was no different. Tonight, we have a little history lesson on why eclipses have fascinated everyone, from ancient societies to modern-day presidents. So for all those details, I'll hand it off to our resident eclipse expert, Brandon Cuck.
Thanks, Sean. What are you staring at? Dude, get out of here, please. That's weird. Okay, well, that was weird. You know, kids, it's not nice to stare. I'm sure, just like that lunatic that was just staring at me for way too long, all of you had staring problems as kids. Maybe at a funny-looking old man or at a homeless person on the street. Your mom had to yell at you for staring for too long. But, you were just a kid, and you had to be reminded that it's just not nice. We all know that as adults, so why is it that when an eclipse comes around, we have to be reminded not to stare again? Why do we enjoy risking our vision to look at two objects that we see every day and night? Well, for starters, it's cool to see an eclipse because they're rare and are a reminder of how cool the universe is. But the problem lies in the fact that some people, even presidents of the United States, are sometimes unaware that we shouldn't be staring directly into the ball of fire in the sky just because a small rock is in front of it. Well, even though the sun is mostly covered and your eyes aren't reacting to the brightness with the typical wince that you give to a light being turned on in the morning after a long night of soda pops and candy, there is still an unholy amount of infrared and ultraviolet rays that, while invisible to the human eye, are still incredibly harmful if directly shot right into the pupil. A pupil that, by the way, is much wider than normal when you're looking at the sun due to that aforementioned lack of visible light from the eclipse. So, long story short, eclipses are not good for your eyes, but they are good for history tidbits, One of my favorite examples of linguistics in history has to do with eclipses, actually. The ancient Chinese believed that the eclipse was a sign of what was to come in the future for the emperor, and they also believed that eclipses happened because a celestial dragon would devour the sun, and during lunar eclipses, that same dragon would attack the moon. The word the Chinese had for an eclipse was shi, which directly translates into to eat. So basically, if you don't want your eyes to eat shi, or she, I guess, then you should not stare at the sun, or else you might go blind on your walk, back, home. And she. The ancient Greeks also loved eclipses, real shocker there, since those guys seemed to love discovering science stuff, and they were actually able to somewhat accurately predict when these eclipses would happen by the 2nd century CE. So the ancient Greeks were essentially calling out when eclipses would happen before the birth of Christ, to put things into perspective. The man who discovered this was an astronomer named Ptolemy, who used equations way too complicated for my pea brain to understand to predict the exact location of the moon at any given point. He also apparently completed this by the time he was roughly 30 after working on it for 10 years. So it might be time for you to get out of your parents' basement, off of Pokemon Go, and out into the real world. I mean, maybe. I mean, this guy was predicting the location of the moon back when calculators looked like ancient Connect 4 boards. And you can't eat without a YouTube video on? We need help. Anyways, there's a lot of other mythologies that surround eclipses and perceive them in different ways. One of my favorites is how Choctaw Native Americans, a tribe that was based in present-day Alabama and Mississippi, believed that eclipses were caused by a giant black squirrel gnawing on the sun, which is just too great to think about if you love squirrels and their intense looks of stupidity at all times like I do. But there is a plethora of information online that details all of the different ancient cultures of the world's perspective on eclipses, and I would highly recommend checking some out and discovering which one you find the most fascinating. It's better for you to stare at the blue light on your screen for 2 hours straight reading about eclipses than to stare directly into one for 2 minutes and, well, end up she-sheing everywhere you go. You know, it's still rude to stare. Okay, whatever, man. I like the attention anyways. Better for him to stare at my beautiful brightness than the sun anyways during an eclipse. Let us know your favorite eclipse lore in the comments below, and stay safe out there, Star Watchers. Back to you, Sean.
Thanks, Brandon. Well, that is about all the time we have for tonight. We really appreciate you tuning into our show tonight. We'd like to thank our entire behind-the-scenes crew for their hard work. We could not do this show without them. We look forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, keep up with us on all of our socials and let us know what topics you may be interested in seeing us cover. Once again, for all of us here at the desk, I'm Sean Romeo. Have a good night.